Okay, so this evening's great excitement is the Aztec New Mexico UFO crash. And about a year ago, in 2017, this document was released. Did anybody see that when it came out? No, and that's my biggest problem, is that it came out in 2017 and sank into nothing. But it's actually really very interesting. It's supposedly a leaked document from the Defense Intelligence Agency that was leaked to Heather Wade at the Midnight in the Desert radio show. Now, she's put the whole document on her website, and the link's up there if anyone wants to go look at it, and I suggest that they do if this sort of stuff interests them. The problem is, it's a document that's been leaked, so we've got no real provenance. Heather Wade thinks that it's real, and she knows the two sources were ex-military, and she trusts them. But Linda Moulton Howe put some stuff on her website, the Earth Files, and Linda Moulton Howe is a really good researcher. She's really on the ball. But she was contacted, or knew some ex-Navy military men who think that this whole thing is fake. Their main objections were that real classified documents don't have the words classified stamped on them. They think this whole cover page is wrong. Just the whole thing's wrong. They say the logo wouldn't appear on the front page, and just the whole thing's a mess. But as I said, Heather Wade thinks they're real. But from my perspective, I also believe that they're real, because I've spent a lot of time stealing files from the CIA, and they come in all sorts of formats. And anyone who's worked in bureaucracy knows that things change all the time. Processes change, formats change. This week we've got memos with this header, and next week we've got memos with a different header. What I've looked at, we get these documents that are as boring as all get out. You know, they do have secret stamped on them. Then we get these really weird things. That's clearly not sticking to any sort of format. I got downloaded this myself from the CIA, so I know that it's a real document. We've got ridiculous font. I mean, that just looks bizarre. It looks like it's from the medieval times. We've got traffic lights on there. And then we've got these other documents that do have logos stamped on them. So I do think that the sources that Linda Moulton Howe spoke to may have been over-exaggerating the circumstances. And I also suspect that it could be that the faintest whiff of anything being a fake, and people don't want to know, they all just walk away. So the consequence being that this document has just sunk into the swamp. But I don't think it should sink into the swamp. Not long after the document was released, there was a small article in Nexus magazine about it, and in this current issue there's another one. So I don't think the documents are faked, and I've read them every single page, 47 pages, and transcribed it into proper English so I could read it properly. But during that reading I discovered that, well, it's clear that they are documents from the 1980s. Late 80s was just before the computer really came into vogue, and word processing wasn't too popular at that stage. I think it was the early 90s before people got word processors and printers, so everything was typewritten. The same letters are out of line all the way through the document. The style of language and the grammar is very much from that period. The way things are capitalised, there's too many colons and semicolons. The sentence structure, all of this stuff, we don't do that anymore. It's been 30 years or 40 years since then. And we speak English differently. So what have we got? We've got this really weird piece of paper, or 47 pieces of paper. And what it is a preliminary briefing document. So it's a condensation of probably 30 years of history meant to be designed for the incoming Commander-in-Chief, it seems, who was, in 1989, George Bush. So 12 days after the date of this document, George Bush was put into power, but he'd been president or vice president already, so you think he would know about UFOs. He was also the director of the CIA, so he also should know about UFOs. So why was he being briefed? So later in the document, there's a assessment of the situation paragraph. And sorry if this lecture is a bit wordy, but there's a lot of words, as you can see, it's all typewritten. So any attempt to properly assess the present situation as it relates to the issue of national security or the risk of cultural upheaval, it's important to take full advantage of hindsight and historical retrospection. So they're putting all this stuff together because something is happening or possibly is about to happen, and they want the President to have some perspective on what's been going on story so far. So what happened in the 80s? Well, the late 1980s, UFO sightings were really on the increase. I mean, in here, in 1988, we had the Knowles family encounter on the Nullarbor. And you know, it was only when I typed that word Nullarbor on this presentation that I realised that Nullarbor is two words stuck together, which is null arbor, which is no trees. How old did I have to get to figure that out? And now you all know, you don't have to use your own brains. So the late 1980s was when the Belgian triangles were going berserk. We had heaps of sightings across the Americas, and there was the Great Canadian UFO Survey. And Russia was having an increase in sightings, so we had the Voronezh incident in 1989, which there's an article in this current issue of the journal, where tall aliens with 3 heads came down to Earth with a robot, and I can remember reading that in the newspaper at the time. Also in 1989, that's Heidi, not a milkmaid, but you know, she fitted the situation. So a milkmaid had an encounter with a creature that looked like a man but was taller than average with short legs. Later on, a newspaper in the same area said that an abominable snowman had been caught stealing apples. They do that. And researchers had registered the influence of energies at a site in Perm, leading a geologist to conclude they had discovered a landing field for flying saucers. Now, this net bit is just in here because it amused me. But there was a communication between a psychic journalist. Now, wouldn't that be handy to have a news reporter who was also a psychic? And he had a telepathic communication with the being. Said, "Where are you from? The red star of the constellation of Libra is our home. Could you shift me to your planet? That will mean no return to you, for you, and danger for us." What danger? Thought bacteria. The newspaper added to the chagrin of Soviet scientists, the thought bacteria are everywhere. And I think that's really interesting. You don't want to be poisoned psychically or psychologically. So within this context, things are heating up, and don't forget the 90s was when the wave of abductions really got a hold of the world. We have this document. So this is the table of contents. It's divided into 5 sections with an appendix. So basically, the objectives and the history of Operation Majestic, and I'm not going to go into depth because probably you've all read about Operation Majestic and the Majestic 12, what happened at Roswell. Section C is what happened at Aztec. Section D is selected and condensed conversations with the Aztec extraterrestrial biological entity, which when we get there, you'll find out they got a person out of that crash. Then you've got Section D, the assessment of the situation. So, we're just going to work through these bit by bit because there's a lot to think about, and I want people to really think, because if this is real, this stuff is mind-blowing. So here's the background of Majestic 12. It's a top secret or above top secret research and development operation responsible directly and only to the President of the United States. The group was established by special order, blah, 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 of President Truman in 1947 upon the recommendation of Vannevar Bush and the Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal. Now, does anyone know what happened to James Forrestal not long after this? Yes, he had met an unfortunate end.
He committed suicide.
Supposedly, he was put in a mental institution not long after the Aztec crash, and they believe it was because of what had happened. And he disappeared over the edge of a building. So, the objectives of the group include the evaluation of risk control and containment of the violation of United States airspace and of national security by unknown and possibly hostile aliens of one or more advanced races of beings presumed to have originated elsewhere than on planet Earth. And as you can see, that's the text included up there. Okay, so these are the established aspects of the situation. Advanced beings of non-human nature are continuously being detected along with their flying disc craft. The remains of 7 flying craft and the bodies of 27 deceased non-human beings have been recovered as of this briefing day, which was 1989. 3 of the recovered craft are nearly intact, and 1 such machine has maintained some of its power. And since 1957, no additional alien craft have been available. The assessment is that these beings have adapted or perfected the machines to the conditions of our world so as to avoid any further such revealing crashes. So, this section bothers me a lot. Magic 12 is headed by a directorate of 12 persons chosen for life. The president may recommend an appointment, but other decision-making lies with the office. Membership on the Magic 12 directorate is finally decided solely by that group, which means they're responsible to nobody. They pick who's on there and they get rid of who they don't want on there. Only from within such a family, wherever you see the X's is where the words are completely illegible. So only from within such a family is it possible to have a unknown of the special mindset required for this very unknown kind of work. It has been said by a former director of the group that the understanding of alien minds requires an alien mind, which bothers me because that means they're putting probably people who are quite inhuman in their thought process into this situation. They don't think the way we do. They're probably, I don't know, possibly Asperger's type people. This is the organisation.
Psychopaths.
Could be anything. It's not a healthy situation really, and they're deciding how we interact with alien beings. So the directorate is composed of 12 members with equal authority. There's task units, scientific and information gathering groups. There's enforcement, composed primarily of selected recruits from the Army Special Forces Command. These units are organised into companies known as Blue Berets. The purpose includes containment of tactical situations, control of public awareness, panic evacuation, etc. Also includes a number of plainclothes operatives whose purpose is the spread of cover stories, to avoid public fears about the inability of the government to control the situation. These members also operate diversions for civilian investigators to discourage such efforts so as to aid in control of public information. So we've been hobbled from the start, if we're to take this as genuine. How are we ever going to know the information we've been given, whether it's real or not? So this section outlines the Roswell incident. And as you can see, there's a lot of text there, which is why I encourage you to read it. I'm just pulling out the most interesting bits. So this is just a recap of what happened at Roswell, which I'm sure you all probably know. There was a ship, it crashed, they pulled out some human-like beings. The interesting thing about this document is that they're saying the human white beings had fallen to Earth about 2 miles east of the crash site, which is quite different from other stories that we've seen. They were all dead and badly decomposed and half-eaten apparently, and they weren't found for a week. A special scientific team took charge of the removal of the bodies and the recovery of the craft, and the civilian and military witnesses were debriefed, code word for probably locked in a room and beaten around the head till they agreed not to say anything. And the reporters were given a cover story about the weather balloon. So we know all that. But what Roswell did was frightened everyone. They were unprepared. They did not realise what the hell they were about to have landing on their lap, and they realised that they needed to form a special operation group to handle this stuff if it ever happened again. And that group became known as the Majestic 12 group. The rest is history. Then we move on to what happened at Aztec, New Mexico. And who is familiar with Aztec, New Mexico crash? No, see, it's a mystery. It's not a mystery, there's a book about it, but it's quite old. So, the basics are on the 25th of March 1948 at about 4:19 p.m, a disc-shaped flying machine crashed northeast of the small community of Aztec, New Mexico. It was a controlled landing, they think, and it happened in a small desert canyon on farmers' land as usual. So, the approach of the disc was tracked with the aid of 3 missile tracking radar stations belonging to the White Sands facility, and the disc craft which is how they refer to it throughout, was first observed in violation of the restricted airspace of that facility. So it was on a level glide path, heading from southwest to northeast at 3,200 feet. And they scrambled some fighter jets from White Sands to chase it, intercept it, whatever. So about an hour later, the disc craft appeared to lose both speed and altitude at the exact moment that it was triangulated by returns from the 3 radar dish antenna. At the time, it seemed to be an evasive tactic, but the assessment now is that the microwaves from the long-range radars caused the craft to crash, which is probably where we get that story from. So at just after 6, the craft dropped below radar, just before the squadron would have intercepted it, and they believe it crashed or hit the ground at about 20 past 6. So later that night, at nearly 11 o'clock, the landing zone was secured and a scout team was sent to the canyon. So General Marshall had contacted Vannevar Bush, who I don't think is related to President Bush, and this is one of the people with the alien minds. So he might look nice and friendly there, but he's not. So the local ranger who owned the land, and they've taken the names out there, were held incommunicado while the field analysis and cleanup was conducted. Incommunicado is a polite way of saying it. Apparently the cattle on the land were put into quarantine. They eventually bought the whole farm out from under the farmer. He wasn't allowed to leave his house for some time. But the problem was that at the time, the rancher had visitors there who were out hunting, and one of them was an unemployed oil hunter. And the hunter and the oil hunter got together and told the story, because they were there and they'd seen what had happened, to Frank Scully. And this is the text from the document, was that Frank Scully published a book in 1950. So the breach of security was because their cover story failed. And their cover story was when they put the army trucks to go and collect the wreckage, they decorated them with oil company logos, and the oil hunter knew there was no oil in the area. So that was the blowing of the cover story. So when Scully wrote his book, Magic 12 went into operation and they discredited Scully. And it's nice that they say the action was unfortunate, but they pretty much ruined his life. And this is just a bit of background on Scully. In 1949, he wrote 2 articles about it, then he published his book, and Magic 12 got to Time magazine, who probably are in the pay of lots of interesting anonymous donors. They said that the oil hunters were charlatans who'd conned Scully. Everybody was sued. It was a very, very bad time for everyone. And Scully's name was ruined. So when they called Scully in the X-Files Scully, that was a nice way of bringing him back from where he went. So at about 1 o'clock in the morning, they got trucks together. They sent them out. All the members of the team were sworn to an ultra-top secret security oath. All personal property and identification was left in lockers at Durango. This was probably so that if they had to kill anyone and bury them out there, they would never be identified. But that's really what that's about, taking all their identification off them. So they went to the site by avoiding main roads. They set up a perimeter 2 miles around, which is a long way. They disguised the trucks as oil rigs, which reminds me of Close Encounters when they disguised them as, what was it, lolly candy, piggly wigglies or something. So these are the people that went out. The 4 people from the Magic Ops Directorate were Lloyd Berkner, Batlev Bronk, Vannevar Bush and Jerome Hunsaker. The other people on the team, some of those names you'll know, particularly Mr. Oppenheimer. Most everyone worked on the atomic bomb project, which is lovely, isn't it? That's how we want to greet our alien visitors, by sending people out who made atomic bombs. So the sun rises and they begin looking at the aircraft. So they took radiation levels around, nothing was there. A fine yellowish dust composed of particles less than 5 microns in diameter was detected coating the nearby underbrush. So that was composed of sulfurous substances and was mixed with an unknown and extremely highly electropositive element in the iodide group. It's now known, because they've done their research by the time they've written this document, that this was a form of disinfectant automatically discharged by the craft upon any touchdown to a planet soil, which is interesting. This is the diameter of the ship, which I'm not going to read out loud, but it had landing pods, and there were 3 round hemispheric pods beneath the craft that had been extended. And I'm sure we're all thinking of another UFO we know that has 3 round hemispheric pods underneath, which is, of course, the Adamski craft on the right, but also the German Vril craft from during the war had those pods. Okay, both upper and lower hull surfaces were smooth with no means of entry. The hull was the colour of dull unpolished aluminium and was metallic in nature. There were no seams, hatchets, rivets or portholes obvious. This is part that's interesting. Photographs taken closer than 15 feet were blurred because of infrared and magnetic radiation fields. So they must have fogged the film. No means of entry was obvious, but they thought some of the crew might still be alive inside it. So eventually they crawled across the hull and discovered a small hairline crack. Now this picture's pretty, you can get it on a jigsaw or a poster. I'll just put that advertising in for the company that makes that. So after banging on the hull and yelling through a loudspeaker failed to receive any responses, they tried to widen the crack. At first a discussion was held as to the possibilities of the craft's internal atmosphere being explosive or that our air could be poisonous for the occupants to breathe. Finally, they decided that they would have to take action because if anyone was alive inside, they might die. So, heat from blowpipes, which is quite an old-fashioned term, was applied in excess of 10,000 degrees. Diamond-tipped drill bits were used, and they finally got a crack, only to find another plate of similar construction solidly blocking the view. The craft seemed to have been constructed of both an inner and an outer hull. But when they got their heads inside, they found the interior to be really lit up with bright light. So they discovered that there were portholes or windows, rectangular ones, all around in huge curved rectangles. The exception was the cracked one by which the team gained entry. It had turned a milky translucent colour like frosted glass. So I'm thinking of, that glass that we have, the knock-knock fridge. Knock-knock and you can look inside it. The glass that changes transparent and then blocks off. Which is very interesting to think that, could you imagine the view if you're sitting in a UFO and you've got a 360-degree view of your whole world? It would be really nice. Okay, this was a thin and inflexible skin, barely thicker than 4 sheets of typing paper, and yet direct blows from sledgehammers would not dent or rupture the foil-like substance. Inside the upper cabin, the team found the bodies of 2 small humanoids about 4 feet in height and strapped into seats, like those in a jet cockpit, which faced a row of instrument panels built into a curved countertop. Later study determined that the normal atmosphere inside the cabin was thinner and colder than our air. And when the crack in the window happened, the 2 pilots had died from increasing pressure and temperature, which caused skin hemorrhages, which they said made their skin look very brown and mottled. So this is also interesting. The sections of the hull which contained both upper and lower deck cabins were joined along microscopic lines by means of electromagnetic locking action. When the military engineers found several interlocking key-like devices, they figured out that they could dismantle the craft into sections, which is what they eventually did. They took it apart into its components and put them on trucks and took it away. So the operators of the keys passed the tool over the seam, and the tool looked like a tuning fork, which had each time magnetised with opposite polarity and unlocked the joint when you went in one direction and locked it up when you went back in the other direction, which is very interesting. This is the craft that still had power that was mentioned earlier in the document, and they soon realised the panels were active, and they discovered 3 different styles of writing, which we'll have a look at in depth. So type A word icons were these. Are they familiar to anybody? No? Type B were concept icons. And then Then we've got type C, which is a numerical language, which they thought looked like Braille, but to me looks, if it's numerical, looks like the Mayan counting system. So similarities there, whatever that may be. That is Space Family Robinson from Lost in Space. This is not what they found inside the ship. But inside the cargo hold, they found work tables, medical examination tables, and 14 tube-like chambers built into the wall. So a closer look revealed they were a complex form of refrigeration system. 2 were empty and 12 contained the bodies of looked like human adults and small children, as well as infants, all frozen as if preserved for specimens. The decision was made to remove these and pack them in dry ice for preservation until a later autopsy to determine if they were aliens or abducted Earth humans. So in the process of getting those frozen bodies out, apparently one of the small humanoid adults had thawed out with a pulse and had lived unconscious for several minutes before finally dying. So that's when the scientists realised, quite surprisingly, that they were cryogenic suspension chambers and that the aliens were still alive inside them. So they decided to remove the entire cryogenic section of the craft and relocate it to a better medical laboratory and attempt to defrost some of those EBEs. And that's where they took it to, Los Alamos, where they set up a little hospital, which that's probably not it, but it's probably very similar. Could you imagine waking up there when you really didn't expect to? So eventually they were able to resuscitate 1 adult Earth-like humanoid male and 3 humanoid infants about 6 months of age. So the rest of the infants, can't speak English, the rest of the infants and 1 of the grey-skinned, large-headed humanoid EBEs perished. Which, going back to the psychopaths or the sociopaths, they had decided to experiment first on the infants, who were of little intelligence value when they were perfecting their defrosting techniques. So the adult turned out to be an EBE. He spoke perfect English and had many telepathic and psychic skills. To look at, he was completely human. Internally, there were slight differences in the formations of his internal organs. So you probably wouldn't be surprised. He was surprised, as you can imagine, to find out that he'd been unfrozen alive, but he was otherwise undisturbed. It was explained to him that his intentions proved to be non-hostile, and he cooperated. He would be granted diplomatic status, and be repatriated to his own kind. To this he agreed, provided he was not asked to give away any secrets that could alter the course of our natural cultural development. He couldn't see any problem with them keeping the rest of his ship because he didn't think that they would figure it out very quickly. He was probably right. He did suggest that his people would probably have to drop one in similar condition in the lapse of the Soviet Union, just to keep the balance of power. And then he added, "You're welcome to take this up with any higher authority you can find willing to listen to you." So the thing about that, dropping another craft into the lap of the Soviet Union, is this other document called Project Aquarius that was leaked to Stephen Greer. And it states that in 1958, a 3rd alien aircraft was found in a Utah desert. And one of the passages says that this aircraft was apparently abandoned by the aliens for some unexplainable reason, since no alien life forms were found in or around the craft. And it was in excellent flying condition. So I'm wondering if they'd left one by mistake in Russia and thought, no, I've got to put one over there. So altogether, the Aztec EBE lived with them at Los Alamos for a full year, and then after that he went to a safe house in rural Vermont, nice, where he met with the president. And he was returned to his people in August of 1949. I don't know how or when that would have happened. He gave them lots of mostly non-technical information about his civilization, and altogether they got 683 pages of his recorded conversations, of which this document only contains 7, which is sad. But now we'll have intermission, and after that we'll discuss what the aliens said. Alright, so as mentioned, this document has 7 pages of what they think's interesting enough. or what they are willing to give to the president or let out of their offices. It's probably not the most interesting stuff at all, but it also kind of is. So the following conversations were held over an 11-month interval between various interrogators, labelled here as INT for interviewer and EVE for the Aztec EVE. These are reduced from many hours of recorded debriefing and are included here to give the reader a degree of insight into the character and the personality of the subject. So that's how I imagine a debriefing in 1959 to look like. So, what shall we call you? What's your name in your native language? And I think, just before we continue on, I think another reason that this document's not being taken very seriously is how personable this ET is and how amusing he is. We don't want our ETs to be like that, do we? We want them to be serious, we want them to be separate from us, we want them to be aliens. So, he says that isn't easy for me because you will not get the phonetic pronunciations correct without practice. And I'm not able to write it down because we do not use an alphabetic printed language that I could translate to English. And they say, why don't you try it out on us anyway? And he says, of course, Sethimus. But then the person typing out or transcribing from the document has gone, or Setimus or Secthimus, they can't tell. That's the first of 4 names that I'm known by. So why are you here? Specifically, to bring you these 3 children. And we like trees. Would you mind expanding on that? Certainly. In what direction? You see, we would hate to see you blow up such a pretty little planet to ruin so many nice trees. If you only knew how hard it is to make a tree from scratch. People are easy, they follow naturally, but not without trees, of course. Green things must be respected above all else except children, and are very much alike. Well, what about these babies we found with you? Are they human? What are we supposed to do with them? Raise them, of course, as I would have done. Certainly they're human, perhaps more so depending on whose definition we use. You are too far away from understanding the whole science of bioengineering yet for this to be sensible. But just accept that we have sown the seeds of a rich harvest for your culture, and this will continue. They're only children, not monsters, but raise them well, please, because the care of children is one of the few things we do not laugh about. So, what are the intentions of your government by sending you here? Who sent you and why? If this isn't the first time, why haven't there been official contacts made? And the alien says, sorry. He's probably thinking, who am I dealing with? In reverse order, what? And he strung up from one of those beautiful trees? Why? Because you sent us an invitation we could not resist, for our own curiosity as well as safety. We sent ourselves, or I volunteered, take your pick. And we have no government, we outlawed it, or rather we outgrew it. I suppose you cannot outlaw a thing without laws, and those require governments. Do they not?
Where do we sign?
I don't understand. I know that. Try laughing. You still will not understand, but you'll feel better about your ignorance. Who sent for you? Who invited you? Almost 50 of your years ago you sent us signals. You were looking for us, and you scared us with a signal you should not have been capable of sending. So we answered, but you didn't understand our answer then, just as you don't now. When you didn't respond to our message and you did not come for a visit, we felt that we really ought to stop by and see how you were doing. It has been a long time, and it was the neighbourly thing to do, of course. Besides, it was right on the way to another destination. You've been here before? I know! We were surprised you had forgotten us. That's my favourite line from the whole thing. It's hilarious. I don't see how we could forget you. Are you serious? Very seldom. But yes, your culture, which now dominates this civilization, did forget us. Actually, your people seem to have undergone a period of history in which you were so afraid of old truths that you erased them in favour of religious fantasy. Some of your people remembered us orally in their legends, such as those who speak the Nahuatl, the Narragansett and the Athabascan dialects. They lived when we last visited, but the high point of their cultures is long past. Now, I knew what Nahuatl is because I can say one word in that, which is straw. Where it's important when you want Coke. But Looking up, Narragansett and Athabascan are North American Indian dialects. And Nahuatl is the Aztec language. The interviewer says, I've never heard of them. And the EVE says, not surprising. Your history shows that the conqueror seldom preserves any history of their victims. I speak of the natives in this landmass, those called Indians. The Navajos, the Aztecs, the Incas, the Olmecs and the Toltecs. And that's a giant Olmec head that you're looking at. They were all greater than your own civilizations at a time when you were burning witches and killing their cats. And the interviewer says, oh, you're our witches. And your social pundits speculate and joke about why we don't land in front of your nation's capital building and shake hands. We're different, not insane. They've obviously seen the day there stood still as well. That's what happens when you land on the White House lawn. But yes, you make progress, that's hopeful, but emotionally you are very different from us. Not primitive, that label would be pure egotism on our parts, but you are very different and frightening to us. We are trying to learn to overcome these differences before your runaway technology thrusts you upon us without choice. All right, so you've been visiting us for a long time. I have no choice but to accept that, even though I'd love some proof. But you still didn't tell me who sent you the message from Earth that brought you back here. Funny you should connect those two subjects. If you dig in a place I will show you on any world map, you will find your proof. You see, in a remote part of the nation you called Yugoslavia, we visited and helped the people there to build a very advanced culture over 7,000 years ago. It will be found. This document written 1989, Evie interviewed in 1958. 2005, what happened in the former Yugoslavia? All those pretty colours were Yugoslavia, smack bang in the middle is Bosnia. The Bosnian pyramids were discovered. So, in the former Yugoslavia, there are 5 pyramids there. The largest is twice as high as the Pyramid of Giza. It's been dated to 5,000 and 12,000 years of age. Curious thing about the pyramids is it's got a lot of tunnels and an unknown energy source. It seems to be emitting from beneath the largest pyramid at 28 kilohertz. Water running through the tunnels is drinkable, and it seems to be charged by this energy. It's probably really good to drink. The largest Bosnia's pyramid is covered with 5 to 10 ton man-made concrete blocks. Think of that. Don't forget the word concrete. The concrete is harder than the stuff we use and seems to have been heated to a temperature of 500 Celsius during the manufacturing process. On top of the smaller pit of the moon, it's covered with these tiles. The other thing about Bosnia is there are stone walls very similar to those in Peru, and these giant stone spheres are dug up regularly. In fact, in one town there's so many of them they put them in their garden. No one knows what they are. Back to our discussion with the EBE, there's a beautiful mystery in the fact that the person who sent us your first message 41 years ago did come from this nation originally. His transmission was sent from near here in the state you call Colorado. Can you tell us his name? Are there any other proofs? Thousands of proofs if you look around. The scientist I spoke of was an electrical researcher named Nikola Tesla. Now, this is about Tesla. He did report that he got communication in 1899. The signals are the results of an attempt by some human beings not of this world to speak to us by signals. He tried to tell people. The interviewer says, I remember this man you spoke of. He died during the war, but I never heard that he tried to contact other worlds. EBE says it was in all the papers, and when Tesla wouldn't answer, we sent a reply to Marconi, Tesla's great rival, that we had arrived for a visit. Really? When was this? I'm sure he never reported it. You see how you hear, but you don't really listen. We'd arrived here in 1920 or 22. They later found out it was 22. And we sent him the letter Y in his own code. It meant that he had visitors. And he told everyone he knew for certain that the signal came from outer space, but nobody really listened. There's the article in the paper. There's Marconi. He did tell everyone that he had been receiving a Morse-type signal that he believed originated from another planet. Then the ED says, I just thought of a very good puzzle for someone of you to solve. On the island, named the Isle of Pines in the Pacific Ocean, you'll find what's left of a concrete landing platform we built there 115 of your centuries ago. You can't miss finding that, since the footings were put down still cover many acres. Look for those if you would like to. No culture on your planet could have built them at that time. It would be fun for me if you ever locate them, because my great-grandfather helped to pour the mortar for them. Now, did anyone read Nexus? Well, yeah, you know what's coming. Warren Aston read this document. He's a researcher in Brisbane. He is a good researcher. He travels a lot. He puts his money where his mouth is. He thought, I'm going to the Isle of Pines in 2017 to find the magic concrete. What did he find? The magic concrete. He found the Isle of Pines has over 300 earthen mounds, and during the 50s and 60s, some of them were excavated and found to contain concrete cores. Cores were dated to 12,900 years ago, which is very similar to what the EBE says. And remembering that humans are not meant to have been in Polynesia, even though we know that's not true. So he found the cores had iron oxide nodules encircling them, and a cone-shaped object made of iron buried beneath the cores, pointed end down, sort of shaped like a top. He also described vertical shafts hollowed out of the centre of the concrete cores, which suggest anchorages for pylons. He speculated that the iron cone beneath the cores might have been part of an electric or magnetic system. Is there a link between the concrete in Bosnia and the concrete in the Isle of Pines that the EBE said would be there? There's concrete at both sides, which we weren't supposed to have been able to make. There's the possibility of an electrical system on the Isle of Pines, and there's still a functioning electrical system buried beneath the Bosnian pyramids. And there's an extraterrestrial biological entity that I can't say right. His grandfather was probably a concrete mixer 10,000 years ago. I mean, I know you like to think of these things being created magically, but really concrete requires mixing, no matter what. So back to our conversation. Why did it take 20 years for you to answer Tesla's message? We did not. We answered it immediately. Oh, I see. Our arrival took 22 years, not 20, because that's how long it takes to get here, from where we were when we got Tesla's invitation. But why not contact us after such a journey? EB laughs. I'm sorry, but you still do not see. We did contact you. We are contacting you, all to the limits of your ability to hear our message. I keep telling you that it's relative. Please laugh about it. I'm trying to explain a limit to your perception, which is caused by your limited perception. Do you see the wonderful paradox? He must feel like he's talking to 2-year-olds. Yeah. If you say so, your trip has no purpose in our way of seeing things. Of course not. That's why we do what we do. Listen now, because this could go on forever if you do not. We are at home wherever we park our craft. It is huge by any standards you could apply. We are concerned because this area of space is one we cross regularly as a simple matter of course, like your campers who vacation at the same place every year. Suddenly we find our camping site threatened by bears. But bears are protected. You're not supposed to hurt them. So you must tame them or give up the whole vacation. And I like that we're compared to bears because, they'll either ignore you and walk away or they'll rip your face off, which is humanity in a nutshell. So we can't interfere with you any more than you would interfere with bears in your parks. Someday we would rather you joined us, visited our worlds, where we do make camp, and joined us on our long voyage of discovery. Or not. It's your decision as long as you do not try to alter it, or to try to alter ours. Try and grow into our perspective, and all the logic you question will seem very reasonable. It's all a matter of scale. Centuries instead of decades. Someday you will be just about like us and you will see. Some new short-lived species will think you are a crazy metaphysical paradox too. And you will have to learn to treat them gently as children without letting your egos get in the way. You speak of the heart being the seat of emotions. This is a concept we use on Earth, but we know it to be a sort of romantic fiction. Why does an advanced race like yours maintain such a notion? Which again, this is our mindset. We think they should be beyond this sort of stuff. But they're not. Well, I use that particular expression for your benefit. But why do you object to romance? Your species is driven by little else except romantic vision. Why not ours as well? Certainly our way of life must seem romantic to you. It does to us. We write poems and express ourselves with works of art just as you do. Many of the greatest works of construction on your world were inspired by a joyful effort of our people and yours in your distant past. We leave these wherever we go, and you romantic creatures have tried for many generations to explain why such huge monuments to human engineering were ever built in the first place. They were built to express the joy of living, of course, and the great sense of satisfaction our people have gotten from working side by side with yours has been one of our biggest joys in life. You keep talking about a message for us. Can you define that a little more? We simply are. We have no deeper purpose than to be. We do not wish direct contact with your people. You would reject us in your present frame of mind. So we seek to be accepted at the lowest level possible, and hence the broadest one possible. This is as a cultural myth. We seek to be the next Santa Claus, to put it bluntly. The message is not that we are here, but that each of you can control where you are going. With faith in the wisdom of truth and in each other, your world will come to us soon enough. Our hope is to be able to receive you as friends and equals when you arrive. This is our message. You must do the work for yourselves. If you do, you will keep all the rewards. So that's about the end of that. Then we have the next. It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Assessment of the situation. So the Magic 12 people have sat back after receiving all this information from the EBE and have said any attempt to assess the situation as it relates to the issue of national security or the risk of cultural upheaval, it's important to take full advantage of hindsight and historical retrospection. It is both an interesting footnote of history and a key point of reference that the human race itself is directly responsible for its being contacted in this century by beings from another world. Through dialogues with representatives of these alien pilots of the flying disc crafts, we have learned that our own scientific curiosity led to the visitations which have been ongoing throughout this century. Back to Nikola Tesla, his purpose was to gather the Earth's magnetic field and to use the Earth as a huge transmitter to send signals to outer space in an attempt to contact whoever might be living there. Tesla had no idea that the specific type of power he had generated was coursing through space and caused great havoc many light years away. But it is now obvious that this single action by a scientific outlaw generated serious concerns amongst the other intelligences in the near reaches of our galaxy. And I like that they call him a scientific outlaw. So apparently you can have mavericks and outlaws. Science, the science police are still out there. The extraterrestrials have reportedly been visiting and regularly monitoring the progress of life on Earth for thousands of our years. And they were very concerned by this odd signal we sent coursing through space. Among other things, it seems that these energy waves can disturb the process of ecology, alter weather patterns, and damage ozone levels in whatever atmosphere they might encounter. As it became clear that our people were on the verge of an explosion of technical progress, the EIs decided on a long-term program of carefully calculated and seemingly random contact, with the eventual goal of raising our awareness of our place in the galactic community. Closing comments. In several cases, volunteers from our armed forces have participated in diplomatic and cultural exchanges during the 1970s and early 1980s and have visited some of the EBE's worlds. There are now hundreds of compiled studies of the EBEs, their worlds and their objectives. And there are 4 basic types of EBEs so far confirmed. This is according to this document. The Earth-like humanoids, which would be the Adamski type creatures, or the ones in South Africa. Kidding. So there are several variations more or less like ourselves. The majority of these are friendly and are the bulk of our EBE contacts. Most have a high degree of psychic ability and all use science and engineering of an advanced nature. The small humanoids are greys, so-called for the hue of skin possessed by this type, are a sort of drone. They're not unlike worker ants or bees. The humanoid EBEs developed a host parasite culture thousands of years ago with the small grey EBEs. They are mostly under the psychic control of the Earth-like humanoids who raise them like pets or a kind of slave. Assuming the greys are under benign control, they are harmless. So if you do download the document, it goes into a bit more depth about the greys and the so-called master-slave relationship. The non-humanoid EVEs, these are in several classes and come from worlds where dominant morphology took a different evolutionary course. Many of these are dangerous, not for organised hostile intentions, but because such creatures do not hold human life as sacred. To them we are animals despite our intelligence. Thus far, contact has been minimal, with only a handful of unfortunate encounters. These are the transmorphic entities. Of all the forms of EVE studied so far, these are the most difficult to understand. Such entities are not beings or creatures. TEs exist in some other dimensional plane, which is to say not in our space or time. Excuse me. They do not use devices to travel in space. These entities are composed of pure mind energy. They are not unlike ghostly spirits and seem to be only curious about our universe. They are said by other EVEs to be capable of taking on any physical form that they channel their energy into as matter. It ends with there do appear to be forces in outer space that are hostile in the sense that they would exploit us, although not conquer us. And it has become very clear that most races capable of interstellar travel support the principles of self-determination. There is no empire of conquerors threatening our planet. They discuss how the EVEs travel, at least the ones that they call it Aztec. Involves a very large craft that cannot land on a planet, since they cannot approach the powerful gravity and magnetic fields of the stars from which they draw their power. They are placed into a parking orbit at the edge of the galaxy, solar system. These may be millions of miles from the world the EVEs wish to visit. Smaller craft, often but not always disc-shaped, that was a bit of a slip, are used to travel the distances remaining. That's the Dalek mothership, by the way. They are evil. During the current wave of interest in our planet by EVEs, there have been 3 interstellar craft or motherships stationed outside our solar system. These have been rotated at 22-year intervals since the early 1930s. The approach of staging apparent accidental contact was chosen for its low psychological impact on the human race. The problem of direct contact was stated early in our relationship by one of the extraterrestrial biological entities. This sort of slow education is best. As a cultural myth, we stand the best chance of acceptance by the masses of your citizens. Much of the contact of individual citizens by the EVEs seems absurd on the surface. That is so true, and we remain largely incapable of controlling such contact. The pattern developing, however, seems to indicate that a course of action is not directly needed because there's little threat to national security. Forget the individual security. Then we finish with this statement of position signed by Dwight Eisenhower in 1954. Insofar as no threat, implied or expressed, in either a military, civil or societal nature has been forwarded by the visitation of the Association of Visiting Extraterrestrials against the governments and the peoples of these United States of America, and insofar as great and many cultural and technological advances have been derived by such exchange, we hereby grant full, complete diplomatic status and recognition to these individuals from Brio. Now, can you imagine how the EVE would laugh at that? I mean, do they really care if they're given diplomatic status? Basic agreement has been reached on the following negotiated issues. The extraterrestrials will refrain, where and when possible, from open display of their presence to the public at large. Like trying to enforce that. The extraterrestrials will submit... What happened? Will submit substantiating proof and listings of all persons contacted from among the public at large, or that have been removed from the earth for purposes of contact or cultural exchange. As if they're keeping lists. In no case shall anyone abducted by the EVEs be subjected to knowing harm or kept against their will for longer than 48 hours. Oh no. The extraterrestrials, well, they're not keeping lists, that doesn't matter, they don't know who's gone. The extraterrestrials will avoid any willful contact with representatives of the public news media or any private investigators of the UFO phenomenon, groups or writers dedicated to the same intentions. The US government will provide a section of the Majestic headquarters base in Nevada as an embassy compound for the EVE visitors and equip it to their needs. Any exchange of technical, scientific or social information will be conducted item for item and in such manner as to assure that both parties have equal gain from the process. was, what could we possibly give them?
Give me my Shanghai.
And that includes the assessment of the situation. And that's the end. Thank you for having me. Bye.